Hello, America. I'm Robert Reese, and welcome to the CEO Show. We're here today with Michael Houston. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
And Michael is the CEO of the famous Gray Group. This was years ago known as Gray Advertising, and it is
Correct.
the Gray Group. And you actually became CEO on the very day, August 1st, 2017, the 100th anniversary. Talk about what that day was like.
Well, first of all, it was an incredible day because any agency or any company that makes it to 100 years, I think, is a really impressive feat for that organization. And with that, for me, I'm not going to lie, there was a lot of pressure because I am only the fifth CEO that Gray has had. And it was, I became CEO at a time when the agency was undergoing quite a bit of transformation and disruption. The industry was undergoing quite a bit of disruption. And so the pressure of figuring out how to take a storied, reputable, highly successful organization and take that company into the future, there was a lot of pressure. But it was exciting. I actually loved it.
So what were the first steps as CEO? And in fairness, you were pretty young. You were like 46 or something?
Yes,
Probably
exactly.
the youngest CEO in the history, I'm guessing. And
Probably. And the steps were actually pretty well defined by the time we reached the 100th anniversary. I had a pretty clear vision as to what I thought I wanted to do with the organization. And the first thing, which is something that we actually tell a lot of our clients, is when you're looking at your brand, don't throw out the history. So that was the first thing that we wanted to make sure.
And you had to do what you're advising with yourself, which is not always as easy.
Exactly. And I think a lot of times in the agency business, it's like the cobbler's children. We think about ourselves and how to apply our own knowledge last, but it was extremely important at this point, at the 100th anniversary, to really think about how we would advise a client in terms of managing their brand and positioning it for the future. So in terms of bringing it back to the past in order to leverage it for the future, what we knew was that we had this amazing reputation and history of being an extremely strategic founded organization and applying creativity to that. I actually broke the entire history of the agency down into a few different components and explained that to my colleagues, and then talked about what we needed to do in the future. The first component was, how do you create a sustainable business model? And our organization, Gray, was founded by a 17-year-old man with $100 that he had borrowed from his mother to start an agency. So I guess I probably wasn't the youngest CEO, but since then I may have been the youngest CEO. So the first thing was starting with a sustainable business model and achieving that feat. And that's what our founding years were about. It was this real entrepreneurial spirit, disrupting the industry. At that time, there weren't any major organizations, advertising organizations that were led by young Jewish men. So that was this amazing feat that our founders completed. The second phase was really about turning the organization into a global model. So we began to grow with our largest client, Procter & Gamble. As they began to expand their organization around the globe, we started creating agencies in the markets that were important to them. That's different than a lot of advertising agencies in that they've grown by acquisition, and Gray really grew on the heels of what their client needs were. The next phase of our history was really about infusing creativity into everything that we did. As I mentioned, we had been known as a strategic organization, but we hadn't always been known as the most creative organization. And when Jim Heekin joined the organization as the CEO in 2005, he brought in a team of people, myself included, who really wanted to turn the ship around and redefine what Gray meant in today's world. And so that's when we planted this flag of creativity. We established our global mantra of famously effective since 1917, and we really began to focus all of our work on delivering on famously effective, the strategic side, as well as the creative side. So those were the phases that led us up to the centennial. And when I took the stage on August 1st, 2017, and had to talk about what we were doing in the future, I said, we're going to look at everything that we've done in the past and we're going to reframe it. So what does it mean to have a sustainable business model? What does it mean to be global today? What's the real benefit of a global organization? What is creativity? How are we going to open the aperture on creativity and the definition of creativity? And if it took us 100 years to do those 3 phases previously, it's going to have to take us 5 years to redefine them in the future, because as we know, everything is moving so much faster today.
So let's look at the word creativity.
Yeah.
Everyone is talking about innovation. What is your take on the definition of what creativity is, and how did you reframe that at Gray Group?
Such a great question, because particularly in our industry, the word creativity is bandied about very loosely. And I think it's important to step back and really define for ourselves, what do we mean by creativity? So for us, creativity is taking 2 or more things that have previously never been together and putting them together.
Wait, what a brilliant insight. You're taking 2 things, and in that simple sense, you've created something new, which is the definition of creativity.
Absolutely. That is exactly how we define creativity. And then in order for it to have some sort of resonance with people, it's important to really understand cultural factors that can impact the combination of those 2 things coming together. So for us, it's about understanding what's happening in culture, putting 2 or more things together that have previously never been together, and putting something into the world that is surprising, quite frankly.
This is Robert Riso on the CEO Show, where we speak with the CEOs who've reinvented the fabric of America. We're here with Michael Houston, who is the worldwide CEO of the famous Gray Group. So we've spoken about creativity, we've spoken about innovation. How do you lead a team to deliver for the client? Because you're saying how you really grew based on, in the early days, Procter & Gamble's back. I mean, you grew with them for the client.
Correct.
So what is the connection between being creative and delivering the results in an effective way?
Well, it's important. It's important to clarify that it's not creativity simply for creativity's sake, or art for art's sake. It's applied creativity to solve problems. So our mission is to use creativity to solve our clients' business problems. And that's what we've been doing for clients such as Procter, as well as all of the clients that we have around the globe today. And I think what's key to this is really helping not only clients understand, but our own internal organization understand that what's at the heart of creativity is diversity of thinking. That, again, you can't put unlike objects together unless there's diverse thinking. And
and in diverse thinking, you're not just talking about diverse on the outside, you're talking on the inside.
Absolutely. Of course, it's perspective that people bring to it. It's the different cultures that are influencing ideas. It's understanding that the client has a perspective and that we have a different perspective, and that diversity. And when those things come together, that's equally as important. What's most interesting about this to me, and I think one of the reasons that we have such strong relationships with our clients, is because most organizations aren't built to deliver diverse populations and diverse thinking. I think that most organizations and many cultures are rewarded for thinking the same way. And I believe that most of the organizations that are at the forefront today of technology and of disrupting industries are those companies that have created cultures that are rewarded for divergent thinking.
And on that note, we're about to take a break, but all of you CEOs out there, think about this concept. If you're reshaping your company, think to what is the heritage, what are the foundations, and then say, how do I reframe them? That's what we've just learned from Michael Houston. What is the website of Gray?
Gray.com.
There you have it. We will be back in a few. And when we come back, we're going to listen to Michael's insight on what quiet leadership means and how he moved into the CEO position. Back in a few. Hi, this is Robert Reese on the CEO Show, and we're here today with Michael Houston, the worldwide CEO of Gray Group.
Good to be here.
Let's talk about your concept of quiet leadership.
Absolutely.
What does that mean?
So I've often said that I don't want to be the CEO of any type of organization. I only want to be the CEO of a creative organization. And creative organizations are very delicate organizations in many ways. And what I mean by that is creativity is, as we've discussed, putting two or more things together that haven't been put together in the past. And that requires courage, it requires bravery, it requires an environment where people feel safe to have a different point of view than others in the room. And in fact, we have to reward people for having different perspectives than others in the room. So the concept of quiet leadership really comes into play because if, as an organization, we have leaders who are constantly telling people how to do things, if we are overly harsh on surveillance, if we reprimand people for not doing things the way we would have done them, we're not creating and fostering an environment of creativity. And so if we want creativity, and that's what I'm in the business of,
that's great.
We absolutely have to understand that at certain points, we need to step back and allow people to do what they need to do. They need to feel free to take the risks that they need to take. They need to understand that when they fail, that's okay. It's all part of the scientific and creative process. We have to get back on it, and we have to fail quickly. So I'm not advocating tons of failures. But what I am advocating is not telling people that in their bravery to experiment, that if it doesn't go exactly as planned, that was a mistake. It was all part of the creative process.
And it sounds like the more you enable that environment, the more creativity, the more innovation is going to occur, hence the better outcomes. And that starts with a diversity of thinking and an acceptance of failure.
It's absolutely right. And in fact, some of my colleagues and I have done a lot of studying of creativity and looked at children to understand at what point children become less creative and where that creative spark begins to fade a little bit. And in looking at those things and identifying those things, we've then created and tried to create an environment within our agency where we don't allow those creativity killers to live.
That is really interesting. So based on this, CEOs everywhere that I speak with are looking to improve their organizations. You, as an advertising agency that I think out of the last 5 years, twice you've won the best advertising agency in the world.
That's right.
Best culture, a lot of awards, J.D. Power Awards, Presidential Award. What advice do you have to CEOs on how they could build innovation into the fabric of their own organization?
So it's a great question, and I think that at its most simplest form, the way toward innovation is not to force the innovation. Instead, it's about creating the environment where innovation can live, where it can breathe. It becomes an organism and a process unto itself versus simply the output.
And any advice on how you build that environment?
Absolutely.
What a CEO should do? Is it meetings? Is it not charging people for failure? Or what is it?
No, I think the secret behind it is really bringing in as many diverse points of view as one can stomach. It again, bringing in those points of view and all that diversity, there's a collision. There are going to be sparks, there are going to be arguments, there are going to be failures, there are going to be heated tempers. If you don't like that and you don't enjoy that, then I would argue that perhaps innovation is not
for you. Don't try it at home.
Exactly.
So thank you for that insight. And I guess that all ties into your idea that creativity emerges from two disparate pieces coming together.
Exactly right.
So let's look at your upbringing in the business. really, you weren't an account manager, you weren't a creative, you had a different upbringing. Talk about what it was in your upbringing that led you to the path of becoming CEO of the Venerable Grey Group.
Absolutely. So, my first job in advertising was actually the product of a letter that I had written, a very impassioned letter that I had written Jay Chiat, which in the
day he was the hot one.
Yes,
everyone loved him.
So in the 80s, his agency, Chiat Day at the time, was at the absolute pinnacle of creativity. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I wanted to be in the center of that. And the reason I wrote him this letter is because I was actually studying advertising in a journalism school, and the curriculum was not a curriculum that I agreed with. And in particular, what I didn't agree with is that someone had to relegate himself to a certain department, that either I was going to be a suit or I was going to be a creative. And I said, hang on a second, what about the strategy? What about the production that brings this thing to life? How come a suit can't have a creative thought? How come a creative person can't actually be business oriented? So I wrote him this letter, and Jay called me back and said, you've asked me a lot of questions, and unfortunately, I can't answer them all for you. But fortunately, I can give you the environment where you can answer them for yourself.
Love it.
And so my first job, I actually worked on a single account and worked in every single department on that account. Coming out of that, I decided that I probably did need to focus a little bit, and I started I then moved into an account management track, but eventually really found what I think was my calling in business development. And the reason that I loved business development and spent almost 20 years doing pitches, pitch after pitch after pitch, was because I got to experience and touch all aspects of the business, the creative, the business, the planning, and I did that in extremely truncated time frames. The beauty of a pitch situation is you have no time to come up with the answer, and the entire agency needs to come together very quickly, rally around a strategy and a point of view, and blow everything out as quickly as possible. So yes, I like to touch every aspect of the business. Perhaps my colleagues don't like it because many times I think I am the strategist or the lead account person or the creative on the business. But I also invite them to play those roles as well.
I'm going to ask you one more question, but first, everyone listening in, think about this. If you want to create innovation in your organization, get as many diverse people as you can. Get them all in the room, let the sparks fly, and see what happens, create that environment. So now you've about 1 minute left. Yeah. Talk about the future of Grey Group.
So the future of Grey Group, first and foremost, I would say that it's extremely bright. And the reason I believe that is because we've got an amazing global team that has come together and believes in a vision where creativity will still have extreme power to move people. For as many changes and disruptions that exist in the world, there's actually a fundamental thread in what we do in connecting to consumers. People still value storytelling. People still have emotions and want to be moved. People still love and spark to creativity when they've seen things that they hadn't seen before. And that's what our business is and has always been about. Yes, technology will change things. There will be new media outlets. There are going to be tons of things that will change. But the fundamental of the business is in terms of using creativity to move people and drive businesses for our clients, that will never change.
And there you have it. A pleasure having you, Michael,
Great
on
to
the
be
CEO
here.
Show.
Thank you.